So Max, he works with me at Quantopian. He's lead data scientist, runs our academic program. Kathryn, hopping over, who's the chief research strategist at Alpha Simplex Group. Andreas, who is the chief investment officer at ACES. Is that the right pronunciation?
Yep.
All right, close enough. And Peter, who's the chief data scientist at RavenPack. So what we thought we would do, what I thought we would do, and I think you guys agreed to, is that you would each take maybe 1 to 2 minutes and give us a quick background sketch, what path you followed and what your current role is. And then I have a grab bag of questions if you guys aren't asking enough questions. But we want this to be an interactive panel. So once we go through the intros, just raise your hand and I'll be looking out. And I don't know if we have a mic for questions, Kelly. I don't know if we have one more mic, but if not, I'll repeat the question into the mic. So raise your hands with questions after we go through. So Max, do you want to get started?
Sure.
Okay.
So hi everyone, is this on? All right, doesn't seem to be. So don't stress it, let's swap. Cool. Is this working now? Excellent. I can't even hear it. Hi, I'm Max Margenot. I work at Quantopian. I'm the token millennial on this group. So I started my career relatively recently. I studied mathematics and computer science for my undergrad, did a master's in mathematical finance, a bit of applied math, and from there started working at Quantopian. My day-to-day looks like building up analytics on our user base, having a look at user behaviors, trying to harness the community to the point where they can produce algorithms that we consider contest-ready or algorithms that we would consider for an allocation, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's me.
I have a background from economics and econometrics, so you can say perhaps a little bit more traditional quant, even though I'm in a non-traditional role today. I started out, I did my undergrad in Copenhagen and my master's in London. I continued studying or doing research at the business school that I was doing my master's in, and then continued as a quant with Standard & Poor's, working with portfolio optimization. I then went on to Credit Suisse to work more in the structured product space, looking at capital guaranteed structures and so on. After that, I went back to Denmark, where I'm from, and worked in a Danish investment bank called Saxo Bank, where at the end I was leading the team that provided quantitative support to everything in the bank that wasn't market making. So that was quantitative marketing, quantitative sales, also quantitative support to asset management, and also to the option trading desk. So a quite broad mandate. About 10 years ago, I got the opportunity to join RavenPack. We are a news analytics provider, so our expertise is within natural language processing. I was the first guy that they brought in that had a financial background. I'm running the data science team there. Our main responsibility is really to sit as an internal client because we cater for a very secretive space. So the amount of feedback that you get from the marketplace is fairly limited in terms of what works. You do tend to get to know when something doesn't work, at least when it comes from our product, if something is wrong. But you rarely hear about how they really take advantage of the data. So in order to get that feedback, we have built an internal team that researches the data, also provides inspirational research. So I would say the role that I have now is very much research driven. Of course, in my own role, as the team has grown, I'm probably making a leap more into sales and marketing. So I call myself a sales quant these days. So I'm more the voice of the data science team at RavenPack these days, but also still heavily involved on the research side, but more from a strategic point of view.
Hi, my name is Kathryn Kaminski. I guess I'll start with my background. Right now, my current position is Chief Research Strategist of Alpha Simplex Group. I started off as a mathematician or an engineer. I did my undergrad in electrical engineering at MIT, and then I did a PhD at MIT in operations research. I was always very interested in signal processing and a lot of different applications in finance. Following that, I taught at the Stockholm School of Economics in finance and also worked as an allocator for a fund of funds that focused on systematic and quantitative strategies. That's how I got into the industry, and that was back in Sweden. After that, I've also worked with ISAM out of London, as well as Campbell and Company as a researcher in the research teams, and working also with some of their thought leadership and other ways of communicating how to think about systematic strategies like trend following. In 2014, I wrote a book on trend following called Trend Following with Managed Futures. And so I've spent a lot of time really working with quants in that area. On a day-to-day basis, I'm involved in model development, the research process for understanding what new models should go into a portfolio, as well as examining different areas where risk management, portfolio construction can add to the performance of portfolio. So I also do a lot more, like you're saying, as you get a little more senior in your career, spend a lot of time working with large institutions, trying to help them to understand what we do in our quant space, and also understand how to use these type of strategies in their portfolio, understand how they work and how they perform over time. So
I'm good. I managed to steal a mic before. My name is Andreas Clenow. For those of you who stayed from last room, and I can see a lot of faces I saw for the previous session. You had a brief background already. I am part of the apparent Scandinavian majority on this panel as well.
That was not intentional. No one told me about it, but what?
It was our plan all along. So I am originally from Sweden. Grew up in Sweden. I lived in Switzerland now for nearly 20 years. My background, I would say, is a little bit more unconventional. I also am a lowly master's degree holder, so I'm low on the quant scale here. I went to Stockholm School, Gothenburg School of Economics many years ago. I'm slightly older than I look. I started as an entrepreneur back then. This was the mid-90s, and frankly it was too easy not to start a company in the tech space back in the 90s. If you had a basic understanding of computers in the mid-90s, nobody else had, and overnight from 95 to 96, knowledge about computers went from something that you kept your mouth quiet about. It was something that was, you really don't talk in public over the fact that you don't understand computers. 96, suddenly people were just crazy for anybody who understood computers, and it was too easy not to do that. So I got lucky. I got into the tech business at that time. I decided back in '99 that it was time to stop this thing and try the whole grown-up life a little bit. So I decided to try a grown-up job. I got lucky. I stepped out of my IT businesses at '99, and that was for knowledge of any sort. It was simply time to, after graduation, to try to get a job. I ended up quickly getting transferred within company Reuters. I was head of their quant modeling business based in Geneva, and spent a few years there climbing the career ladder until I realized that climbing career ladders is really not what I want to do for a living. Decided to go back to something more real, and I exited this thing and decided that it was time to start something again. I again was quite lucky in that I went into the hedge fund space. First I found investors by a lot of luck. And second, I went into the space at the time where it was actually possible to start a fund with, I believe my first fund was something like $40 million. And today, that's a ridiculous small amount, and compliance costs skyrocketing. It's just not possible to enter the same way as I was lucky to do some 16, 17 years ago. Now we have quite a diverse company. We are doing some quant strategies. We are very active here in America in merchant credit financing for various reasons. We have private equity deals going. We're in real estate market. We do a lot of different things, and more I'm overseeing rather than building, but trying to still build a little bit for fun at times. But these days I have a hard time explaining to people what I do for a living.
Okay, tell me if this mic is working. You guys hear me at the back? Okay, great. So I wanted to thank you for the intros, and hopefully you guys kind of get a sense. I think we have a diversity here of sort of where folks are within their career and what kind of you do within the quant space. So I thought, especially since I'm thinking we have a lot of students here, can I get a quick show of hands if you're a student thinking about this field? Okay, good, great. So knowing what you now know, if you were to start out your career today or start out sort of coming out of school, what skills or education or experiences would you be most interested in prioritizing or acquiring if you wanted to, still wanted to go, if you still wanted to make the same decision and go into the quant space? Who wants to start off now?
I can take that. About 8 or 9 months ago, I moved back to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And if you literally will see people with "I love data science" t-shirts on every corner. You cannot take an elevator without hearing the word machine learning. So if I went back, I'm not kidding you, I was very excited. I would learn more about machine learning, data science, and really beef up your programming skills. But don't forget to also focus on your communication skills while you have the time.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I completely agree with that on both things. So some of the things that I'm looking at least when I hire people, is first of all that they have the skills and the technical skills, and of course machine learning is attractive. It's not the only thing I look for. I also look for more traditional econometric techniques as well, time series and so on. But for sure, communication skills is key. I have hired people that were brilliant, but they couldn't really communicate how brilliant they were, so no one else could really take advantage of any of the work that they did. So that had to end, those kind of relationships. So communication is very, very key. And I also think you also have to remember to get data intuition with you, because you can see a lot of data scientists that are good with machine learning and all of that, but they don't really understand or have a good grasp of the data, and often can make bad decisions. So that's also a key skill to kind of remember, understanding what it is that you're working on and so on.
Thank you. Anybody else want to take that one?
Yeah, even as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, I hadn't really been exposed to machine learning at all. So it's definitely a very recent explosion as far as this stuff is concerned. My background's a lot more in the theoretical aspects of mathematics, a lot of geometry, that kind of stuff. So I got into the computer science, I got into the numerical programming a lot later, and that's something that I would definitely focus on more strongly getting into it, work on a lot more individual projects, put that kind of stuff out. Because that's what I've found to be the most effective way to learn a new technique or to learn a new concept going forward.
So I'm gonna, as usual, Billy, take a little bit different view then. I would say for me the most important thing, if you're young and trying to get into the business, understand how the money is made and what matters and what doesn't. And often the buzzword of the day might be a cool thing for a while. I'm not saying machine learning is one of those. It may, who knows? But in the end, it's a fee-based business. We make money on fees in this business. It's not necessarily the one who has the best results, who has the most money at the end of the day. It's not necessarily the performance. It's not necessarily building the best or the most beautiful algorithm. It's a business in the end. And in this business, it's about volume. How do you attract volume? So it's capital raising, asset under management, and fees based on this. And it's often an appearance or a marketing thing. Why does the mutual fund industry have an enormous amount of money while you can mathematically prove that they haven't been able to do their job since the business was created? It's a brand issue. So cynicism, I would say, is one of the most important things for
so you would
a
be
young
more
person.
cynical.
Yes.
You could go back.
Yes.
Got it.
Can I be more cynical? I don't know. That's a whole difference.
So one of the questions that I get a lot is, I talk to students who are at varying different points in their academic career, and a lot of times I get the question, okay, I'm at a junction where I now need to decide if I'm going to pursue graduate school. If I am I going to look at a master's program, an MFE program, a PhD program? And so I sort of am always hesitant to give folks advice, but I'm going to ask you all to give folks advice. How important, sort of specifically thinking about, how important do you think these different graduate degrees are for, and I want to sort of stay confined to like what we're kind of thinking of as like a traditional quant finance track. And following on that, do you think that's changing? Do you see the industry changing, the expectations of where you can get to with a PhD versus a master's, an MPhil, or self-taught? So whoever wants to start with that.
Well, I have the mic, so I'll go from there. I think at least for me, going through my graduate degree was more a case of helping me to ground my thoughts rather than something that was ultimately necessary in the end. Like if I had done the appropriate projects, if I had focused on building up the actual applied skills before that, I'm fully confident that I would have been able to do the same sort of work that I do now then. But it depends. Like if you're capable of doing the work, I like giving those sort of people that chance. I think that those people who can do the work should do the work. And the master's and a PhD or whatever else you do beyond your initial training is just a matter of helping you focus down and get to that point where you're mature enough or capable enough to apply models in a way that's useful.
I think it's harder to get into quant if you don't at least have a master's. Of course, there are always opportunities out there for bachelor's degrees and so on as well, but I think it's going to be hard. And I would even say that a PhD is preferred in many cases. I can at least see from my own perspective when I hire. I look for both masters and PhDs, but because it's such a heavy research role, PhDs are very much trained in doing research, right? And that's a great skill set. So if I am to hire someone with a master's degree, they need to have something extra. And often that would be, showing out of the ordinary passion for the space, and having done lots of projects themselves on their spare time, perhaps done stuff on Kaggle and taking extra Coursera courses and all of that adds to it, showing that you really want this. And that, of course, is also a key thing. But generally, I also look at masters having a couple of years of experience. And I know that that's difficult if you can't even step in. But it's you need the passion and the drive and some experience if you don't have the research kind of experience from your PhD. That's at least how I look at it.
I think actually I would agree. So this is coming from my perspective of sometimes after I did a PhD, I was like, why did I do that? Oh my God. Why do I hate my life? I was kidding. So, because I really do think that one of the things among my colleagues where I've been in mixed environments where the majority is usually PhD and the minority is non-PhD, the challenge, what the advantage of having a PhD is that you've been through that punishment. In the sense that you have really scratched every nail and you've asked every question and you've spent months like wondering what could be wrong with my analysis. And when I see people who are managing researchers, one of the reasons they like PhDs is because of that skill set. The skill set that they're always looking for someone to rip apart their investment thesis. On the other hand, I do know quite a few really, really good quants who are even better than PhDs that are from engineering or machine learning, and I think it depends on your competitive advantage. So, for example, I know a lot of PhDs who have very little knowledge in certain areas, and so for them it's any new field, it doesn't matter if you have a PhD because that whole field is new and evolving. So I do really think that I've seen very, very successful people in a group of mostly PhDs who have been great leaders in the space because they know how to ask the right questions and how to be really critical of research. But I do think that PhDs are tend to be preferred, sometimes even just cultural reasons, unfortunately. So.
From my perspective, I could, of course, say that PhD doesn't matter, but maybe that's because I don't have one. More importantly, I think, is if you look at the different disciplines. And as I mentioned before, I have a degree in business administration. And I think personally it's much more valuable to have a degree in some sort of proper finance. Because as most of you all have, I'm sure there are some other unfortunate business students out there, and you study this for a while and you realize that this is not actually a proper science, and you're not really trained in scientific thinking doing such a degree. And you exit with some basic knowledge about the markets, you exit with some preconceived notions about what the markets are, the way that the current political climate in universities tell you that it should be, various efficient market hypotheses and Chicago School of Finance things that you have to untrain once you get out in the real world. It's much easier to hire somebody with a proper science background and teach them what they need to know about finance and economics than to do the opposite. Often people like me who have that kind of academic background are stuck in a certain way of thinking, and therefore I would prefer some sort of real science subject instead of business.
Thank you, guys. So I've got a couple more questions. I do want to just pause and give the opportunity if anyone has a question in the audience. Great. Here's a mic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was just wondering what the perception among the industry insiders are from about mathematicians who are academics and trying to get into this field.
That sounds like a leading question.
We have a good, somebody who is precisely incorrect. That's what I always say.
What do you think of mathematicians? I guess we're kind of scared of them because they correct our math. But other than that, I haven't really dealt so much with people who have degrees direct in mathematics. Usually frankly, most PhDs I deal with have a degree in physics or something math related. But a pure math degree, I don't really know those people. So I have
I've hired an applied mathematician. So I think Renee's talk is right now. And my background is physics, but I really not so great at what I think is like math, I guess, or never was. So when I meet an applied mathematician, I have like a deep fear that they know all this other stuff that I don't understand. So I had lunch with Renee. I was like, could you just explain to me like what is applied math? And she talked for a few minutes, and I was like, yeah, all right, I should just hire you because I don't really follow a lot of this, but it's like seems really important. It's been really interesting to see. I think a lot of the things that hiring a PhD from applied math, it was very similar to, I've worked with folks who have PhDs in computational chemistry or biophysics in my field. So I don't know that much about what you do in a PhD in applied math. So my N of 1 is that you come out with those same skill sets of stick-to-itiveness and questioning and sort of dragging yourself through. So I've been kind of had my mind opened a little bit through her. I've met a bunch of other applied mathematicians. And so that's particularly seems like an area where I have seen folks make that transition and do quite well.
I'd like to expand it perhaps a little beyond math and just looking at different kinds of backgrounds, because you can't really get everything from one person. And one of the things that I've realized when building my team is, you get to understand what a computer scientist is good at. They are very good at helping you building infrastructure and making you more efficient as a team and making sure you have the tools available that you need. Of course, you also have the machine learning background there, where they're good at understanding, what are the machine learning techniques available out there, what are they good for, and what are they not so good for. Then you have the physicists, which I've been very happy with. They have very, very strong data intuition, and they blow my mind every time I hire someone. So I would also want to build a team, if I wanted to start from scratch, that also had the physicists in the team. If you look at mathematics, and it also actually comes down to, it also is the case for physics, theoretical physics and theoretical math is probably something I look less for, but I like the computational side or applied side of math, and they also add good value. I'm actually in the process now of hiring a guy who is from computational math and has built some machine learning on top. And then I add people from finance and econometrics, or economics, because they can help on the hypothesis side. So what are the things that we really need to solve? How does the markets work, and so on. And then, can you say the mix of skills, I think, is what really creates a powerful team.
So good new ideas tend to come from the union of two previous ideas that were not joined together before. And having spent a lot of time mostly with like theoretical mathematicians, they're very good at getting into very niche subjects, getting very specific ideas about specific things. And when you bring them together with groups of other people that also have specific ideas of specific things, it's very interesting to see what kinds of ideas they come up with together. Like you get these really interesting unions between them. And I guess that's just a product of having people in niche interests trying to solve the same problem. They bring something from their expertise to the other person's expertise and vice versa. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. I think we had another question here, and then I'll come to you.
My question is mostly for mostly for Peter. If you have a career in something like government or maybe a firm that's extremely secretive about what their algorithms are and what you've been working on, what's a good way to showcase your past, like maybe 5 years of experience if you can't really divulge like what you were working on?
I don't really focus so much on what people specifically had worked on in terms of what projects they solved, more the techniques that they were using. So you can always talk about what models you have been working with and so on. And we also, as part of our hiring process, actually give projects, because I think you can talk to people and kind of get a sense for what they can do, but not everybody are as good at selling themselves as others. And so it's not always, I feel, a fair kind of process if you just only talk to people. So we give people also a project that they can work on and show their skills that way. But I think what's very important is that you highlight the techniques that you have been using and make sure that if you put it on your CV that you can actually talk about it. I see a lot of people that will put skills on their CVs and say, I know random forest and I know this and this and that, but you know, it's not enough just to have read about it, right? You need to have used it and actually be able to answer questions. But it's more about the techniques rather than the exact projects you will work on.
We've got our next question back here.
What about if you have PhD and you have lots of skills, but you don't know how to sell yourself?
Did everyone hear the question? So what if you're a smart PhD with a lot of skills, but you're not great at selling yourself?
I can do that one to start with. I think it is important to sell, because selling is also communicating. And if you don't have communication skills, some roles will be very, very difficult. Of course, you can have a role where you're just sitting there and going deep into a project, but eventually you will have to talk to someone and tell it, say what you're doing. So you need to be able, at least writing skills needs to be strong if you're not good at verbal communication. But I would still say verbal communication is still very important, because often you work in a group or a team. But I think if you can show, we're trying not to lose people in the hiring process that are perhaps not as strong in communicating by giving them projects. But then they still need to show good communication skills in writing.
I would just add, I would suggest practicing it. Find a network of friends of yours that you trust, that are in the industry, or that you need to kind of say, well, how did you get this job? And literally have them practice having you sell what you're doing. I also know other people in the hedge fund industry that have had career coaches and gotten sort of someone to coach them to learn how to work on these things, because they realize that if I don't get better at this, I'm never going to get the promotion, never going to get some other opportunity. So find friends that you trust in the space, get them to coach you in practice so that you can train yourself to do some things that you maybe haven't done before outside of your comfort zone, is what I would suggest.
Yeah, I would strongly agree. I've had a lot of folks who sort of are trying to figure out, I did my PhD, and just like you said, Katie, you then sort of question, like a lot of deep existential questioning, like how did this happen to me? And you don't really realize you have built a lot of valuable skills, And I think part of it is just having, like, sort of knowing how to sell yourself. So you may think, I'm not good at selling myself, but it's probably, you don't have confidence because you're not really sure what is the aspect in the way. So I think it's great advice to find folks who are already on that path, talk to them, and prove, like, force yourself to get better, I think. We have another question right here.
Yes, thank you. So I'm curious what the panel's thoughts are on masters in financial engineering / quantitative finance / computational finance. I guess these programs were built early on to cater to like trading desks on banks, which don't exist anymore. Have they kind of caught up? Are there curricula like geared for the kind of roles that you guys are hiring for?
I can answer a little bit on this because I'm actually teaching. I'm going to be teaching in the Master of Finance at MIT, and this program has been a huge success. It is one of the most exclusive programs. It didn't exist 10 years ago. But what I'm finding is that people are coming in with strong quantitative backgrounds, and they're getting a year to a year and a half, and this is just one program, there's several others. They're getting a year to a year and a half of sort of very intense training in finance and all the skills that you might need to get a job in anywhere on the quant space over here. And their success rates are quite good. I've worked with some of these students, and I am really impressed. So I would say that there are options like that out there where, let's say that you're a physicist and you've done an undergrad in physics or a PhD in physics, go take 1 year or something and just in London or in Boston or whatever. They are actually getting great jobs and respect in the industry. So that's really sort of a good short solution to that
And
problem.
would you specifically say, so one thing I wonder about is it seems like there's a lot of variability across programs. Is that the right stat to sort of look at their placement rate?
I would look at where the people are going. I would also look at the job placement. I'd talk to people from those programs and really make sure that they're going to the places you want to go. The other thing I'm also seeing is a shift that I have some later career friends who are looking at things like an executive PhD. That didn't exist until 2 or 3 years ago. And I have friends who are doing executive PhDs because they have a physics degree. They are now been in asset management for 10 years, and they're sitting there going, I want a PhD, but there's just so much, I don't want to suffer like you, Katie. That's what they say, like, I don't want your life. I don't want to give up my paycheck. I don't want to sit there and like existential, but I want to do the work of a PhD so I can write articles. So edX, for example, has a new program. It's not cheap, but there are options. So the world is changing. The PhD experience is going to be different 5 to 10 years from now. And even the Masters in Finance is really getting a lot of speed. So.
And EDIC is in Nice, France, so it's quite nice location.
Not so terrible.
So you go there? You go there?
No, but I know about it.
No, but I mean, like, you go there for that program, the edit program, it's in person?
You
Or?
have a certain number of visits per year. You have an advisor. I just have some friends that are doing this now, and it's for later career options. And I think that's going to become a more popular option in our space.
You're actually
For
seeing
senior people.
you're actually seeing a lot of professors going there from top universities, because a lot of these let's say part-time executive education degrees are taking place over the summer. So it's a quite nice way for a Harvard professor to make a little extra money when he's not teaching at Harvard.
So if I should add my, again, different point of view. Not that I'm disagreeing, but if you're looking for jobs in very large companies, of course, it's very checkbox management these days. You're applying online, you're checking boxes where a database system will probably, with a high probability, just sort you out because you checked the wrong box somewhere, right? You didn't even get to talk to somebody, explain to somebody. Of course, in those kind of things, it's very important with the exact details. Do you have this degree or not? How many years? The exact fields you fill in. For smaller businesses, as I mentioned, I have more of an entrepreneurial background. Education is good. You should have an education, but what exactly you have education in matters much less than who you are, your personality. Have a talk with a person. Is this somebody who can fit? Is a skill set missing? Maybe we can fill it in, but I would personally not care too much about exactly which school did you go to, exactly what degree do you have. I have a preference towards science degrees over business degrees, but there's a preference. It's not a hard rule. In the end, it's about personality. But that's what you get with a smaller company. With a large one, investment banks, for instance, it's database management.
I think we had another question back here. No, she's going to come get
So my question was for Andreas. I'm also from like a traditional business background. And so how did you what was your path in developing your skills kind of scientifically and computationally after school? And kind of what did you do to develop those?
I think, again, around the mid-90s, I realized that my seemingly useless computer skill, which seemed to be a pointless hobby at the time, turned into be valuable knowledge. I have been programming since mid-80s. That certainly helps in terms of getting into when programming actually started becoming important, quite a long time afterwards. In the 80s, even early 90s, programming was seen as a totally useless skill, especially for building the silly things that anybody personally can build back then. I guess that helped, computer understanding. And after that, you look around, what skills do you need to accomplish something, and you fix it, deal with it. So you're missing something. You're extreme introvert, you don't know how to present yourself, how to talk to somebody. Get over it, do something scary. Go up on a stage and talk in front of a lot of people and get over it. You have to do it, nobody's going to do it for you. So in the end, you push yourself, figure out what's missing and fix it. And I guess that's how I try to handle it. I don't have a quant background. I have very different background from most people who do similar things than I do, but here I am. It's my different point of view.
Thank you. Yes, good. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm working towards a PhD degree in computational chemistry, and I was excited that you mentioned it. So my question was, how important is the knowledge of finance, especially on the practical side, is to a new grad PhD applicants to get a job?
Well, I can't really speak to PhD applicants, but finance in general in the quant space tends to be, in my experience, the easier part compared to the mathematics and the computer science and everything. As Andreas was saying, it's a lot easier to take a scientist and to teach them finance. So there's hope. It's fine. Get some experience, go from there.
Yeah, I don't really care about whether they have any financial background. What I do like to see, though, is if they have shown some personal interest in finance. And there are different ways of doing that, right? Some people would put on their CVs that they have worked on some trading algorithms or something like that themselves, or they have done some, I don't know, worked on Kaggle on some of the financial problems there, or they have been on Quantopian and done some work there. I think just showing some sort of interest in finance, then that's really the only thing required from my side.
I would agree, but I think you got to remember, if finance is like a language, so you just want to make sure that you fluent enough in the language so that you come in and can sort of interact with the people that are interviewing you. So I would spend a little time beefing up some of your finance knowledge just for pure language perspectives. But second of all, if you have a chance to do an internship for a summer at a quant firm or at anywhere for 3 months, that will really give that to you. You won't have to practice because it will naturally be around you. So you'll get all of that finance terminology. So you at least feel a little bit. It also will help with your confidence, because it's always strange when someone's speaking a different language and you can't understand. So they'll ask you a question that's easy, but if you just know enough that you're like, oh, okay, you want me to do that, I get that. So that would be the advice I get. But otherwise, you can learn the rest of it.
Exactly. I mean, terminology is important, but the common mistake a lot of people do is to pretend they understand a term that they don't. And sooner or later you'll get caught doing this. You know, if somebody mentions a term, if it's an interview or whatever it is, and something comes up, well, don't nod and pretend you know what it is. It's perfectly fine to say that you're not familiar with the term. If it's explained to you, probably you get the logic behind this and what matters anyway, and you would much rather have somebody who actually dares to say this than the guy who nods when you say Black and Scholes and turns out 2 months later that he's never heard of this whole thing before. And that's an actual example I had some long time ago. Yeah, ask. It's perfectly fine.
My question is at the more like undergraduate level. So if an undergrad does say like financial engineering, which is kind of what I'm pursuing, like what sort of opportunities are there right after the undergrad level before going on to do some sort of master's or MBA or whatever it may be?
I don't know what if I can answer on that, but maybe looking in banking and also looking in, there's lots of opportunities, even at the undergrad level, and a lot of people sometimes go get work experience and then decide if they want to do something else. I think you may have more.
Well, actually, I don't have much insight on that either, because in Europe, or at least, you tend to perhaps go a little more after masters, at least in Scandinavia. So there are not really that many. Having a bachelor is a fairly new thing. In the UK, there are definitely opportunities for people with bachelors. There, it's quite normal not to do masters. But normally, I would require a minimum of a master's if you want to take a highly quantitative kind of role.
I think as long as you're getting the requisite experience in your internships throughout your undergrad, you can still be a pretty prominent force just with the bachelor's degree alone. I know 2 of the 3 interns that I'm taking this summer are freshmen or rising sophomores in their undergrad, and they're just amazing, and they're building up the appropriate language and will through working with me, and then whatever internship they have the next year and the year after that should hopefully set them up pretty well. So as long as you're getting the right internships and kind of going from there, you'll be just fine.
Your next question's over here.
So what used to be called Quant Finance is changing over the years. So 15 years ago, it could be if you knew factor models and optimization, you were a quant. But nowadays, that's not enough. What advice do you have somebody who's trying to transition from the old quant to the new quant?
I can't really speak to the old quant. About 10 to 15 years ago, I was kicking off an English class. So here we are now. It might be that my firm, the Quantopian in general, is more on the tech side of things than on the finance side of things, but it seems to me that a lot of quant finance is moving more towards what tech companies look like. And again, this might be our unique perspective. We're kind of have more like a hacker mindset than a lot of the traditional finance folks. So maybe you guys can speak more to that.
I mean, one thing that I think when you talk about the old quant, if you go back a little bit more than 15 years, a quant was somebody who looked at moving averages and do some lines in a chart, right? This used to be the quant. A quant, of course, was an insult to begin with. This was something that the bankers called the propeller heads in the basement that nobody cared about. The whole term started off as an insult, and it kind of stuck. Of course, it changes all the time. What is currently what is normally referred to as technical analysis was what the quants were doing 20, 25 years ago. Where is it heading? Well, all you can do is try to look at what you want to do with it. Do you need to keep up with the current quant finance, or do you need to achieve a specific purpose? Is it a job? Is it the performance? Is it the trading? What do you want to achieve, and what tools do you need to do it? So maybe it matters where perception of quants and what quants are doing. Maybe that matters, and maybe it doesn't, depending on where you personally want to go and why you're pursuing it. So look at the practical side.
I think that it's not really a massive leap. You know, I would probably try and familiarize myself with some of the new modeling techniques available. And if you're used to, you know, statistical inference, more from the traditional side, it's not really a big leap into starting to learn some of the more machine learning driven techniques, because they're really not that complex when it comes down to it. I will say that one of the things that may change is that you might need to start training a little bit on becoming a little bit more efficient in your programming skills, because you will probably need to handle much larger data sets than you were before. So you know, what you might have been okay with solving the loop just doesn't work anymore, right? So you have to force yourself perhaps to think of different ways of writing your code in a more efficient way.
I want to do a quick time check. Do we have till 12:15?
Yeah, 15 more minutes.
Okay, great. I wanted to insert one question of my own, and then I'll go back to the audience. So one thing that was took me a surprisingly long amount of time to figure out, so going from grad school into the field, was sort of what does the ecosystem look like? So I think we represent quant jobs inside of a number of different types of firms, and I wonder if you would talk either just broadly about sort of how the ecosystem works. You know, there are quants buy side, sell side, data vendors, like where your role fits, or sort of, I feel like it's interesting for quants to sort of, or people wanting to get into quant to know a little bit more about that ecosystem. I don't know if we want to start with that. Go ahead, Andreas. You're all wearing an ascot, so I think.
Yeah, I am. Quant ecosystem. Well, first of all, obviously, I am on the on the mathematical side, on the lower side of the ecosystem. We don't work with overly complex things compared to many other quant type of funds. My personal background is primarily in the CTA trend following hedge funds space, where the mathematics are pretty simple. Can we call ourselves quants? Well, who's going to stop us? Is it the same thing as proper data science, machine learning, and all of this? Not really. In that particular field, if you say machine learning too many times, somebody would throw something at you. In that particular field, we have this expression when people keep saying machine learning, for instance, as one of many of these things, that if all you have is a hammer, you start seeing nails everywhere. Somebody trained in machine learning wants to apply it on everything everywhere, and in our part of the ecosystem, it might not particularly make sense most of the time. Obviously, we see a lot of others. We allocate to a lot of quant hedge funds as well, and we deal with these guys and different part of the ecosystem. I know much more about the buy side and the sell side, obviously, but of course there are very, very, very complex quant hedge funds. There's also a very large number of them which make impressive efforts to appear to be much more quantitative and much more mathematical than they actually is if you dig into the data. Most things, in my view, are solved with fairly simpler, much simpler things in reality. The details can be important, but those are details. So I think, from that point of view, I think somebody else should talk about the more mathematically complex part of the ecosystem.
I think if you look at a bank, for starters, where do quants sit, or also with asset managers, for that matter. If you look at a more fundamental asset manager, the quants sit in the risk teams primarily, and now they're starting to make their way into setting up data science teams that can support the discretionary portfolio managers. So you're seeing more and more of that, of the fundamental side, kind of building more front office based teams. If you go to the banks again and start from back office and all the way through, you are having quants in, let's say, model validation, also in risk teams. You have quant developers as well that kind of implement some of the models and make it a little bit, can you say, more efficient. They don't build the models, but they make them efficient in terms of how they implement it. And then you have the front office quants that traditionally you had on the option desk. In my opinion, that work is not really getting, it's not that exciting anymore. It's more about code maintenance these days than developing new option pricing models. We're seeing a lot of people shifting from that space because of that. And then, of course, you have quants that are building investment strategies as well on the front office side. What else? I guess we're also seeing more and more quants turning up in the data strategy teams, which is in between IT and the front office. So when you consume a lot of data as a firm, you have a team that might be part of the onboarding and trying to do some high-level analysis of the data to figure out what's the potential of, let's say, making money off a particular data set. So they do a rough filter on the data before it hits the front office quants that will try and build alphas from it. On the vendor side, I guess it's looking very similar. We need similar type of skills, right? We need people that take in data and analyze it to see if there's anything interesting and if it's worth for the company also to invest further in these data sets when integrating it further down the pipeline. We need quants that will, at least in Ravenpack, we have quants that work or data scientists that work with NLP. We have data scientists that work with data preparation, cleaning, and so on. We have quants that do the research of the data, and yeah, I think it's very similar to what you would see in a bank.
Okay, I'll let you answer, and then just heads up, I'm gonna take 2 more questions because I'm between you and lunch at this point. So I see one question there, and I think there was one question back over here. Okay, great, so you two after you answer.
Sure. So, at least at Quantopian, in addition to like a lot of the traditional roles, we kind of have this weird meta role that I sit in, which is the quant that tries to get everyone else to learn the appropriate things to make the right kinds of algorithms. So this sort of meta quant where what's the correct behavior that we want in an algorithm, and then how do we appropriately proliferate that out to anyone in the world and make that as easy as possible, that kind of thing. So as things get more techy and as crowdsourcing becomes more of a thing, you might even see more weird stuff like this, whether through Kaggle contests, kind of trying to harness that kind of thing, or algorithmic trading contests in the way that we try to put things together. I don't know, things are getting stranger as they kind of bubble up.
Okay, my question is, so for young quant who just started their career, what are your recommendations for them to maintain long-term success in this trade?
Always be learning new things. Personally, I try to find fun projects whenever I find a new technique. I find some excuse to learn it with a fun endpoint. So I have hundreds of just totally uncompleted projects because I accomplished my ultimate end goal or my secret end goal somewhere through it. So it's like, all right, I'm done. I finished what I needed to do. So reading new papers, learning how to use new tools is always super important. Trying to implement papers based on the new tools that you've used. All this stuff keeps your skills fresh and keeps you up to date with the most recent techniques, the coolest, neatest things. Like a lot of really interesting new methods in machine learning have only been like the past couple of years, like generative adversarial networks, like past few years, and improvements on that even more recently than that. So there's always new stuff, and the rate at which it's coming out is just only accelerating.
I would say, yeah, be curious about the space that you're working in, and always focus on that there, even in perhaps seamlessly boring task, there's always something you can learn from it. Also, make sure that you can take some risks as well, and that's also where you kind of push yourselves a little bit out of your comfort zone. I think that's a good thing. That's where you learn the most, and that's also where sometimes I would say your boss will appreciate that you sometimes take some risk and go ahead, do things instead of just asking him or her all the time. So really also focusing on being able to execute instead of just digging deep into something and trying to do the perfect thing. I think those are probably the most important things that I'm looking for, and try to be passionate and show that.
I would say, and this is something that people don't usually think about, work with smart people. Make good friends and alliances with people that are really, really smart, and get them to teach you what they know. So make liaisons, make connections. And this is important because it's not just about where you are today, it's about where you are in 10 years. Because 10 years from now, those are the people that you learn from that are actually going to help you to make your career go farther. And that's very, very important. A lot of people just think about what they know. Think about what you can learn from other people. Surround yourself with people who are smart. Allow them to be smarter than you. Learn what their tricks are. And you yourself will become much more multidimensional. And your career will have more legs because you'll have ambassadors around in your field who will push for you.
I would add as well, be different. Don't do what everybody else does. You can be the absolutely best in your field. You can be one of the best. You do everything right. You follow this career path that everybody recommends, but everybody else just did that. You're competing with everybody else who are just as smart and doing the same thing, and now you're, I think the expression is a gray man. You're just one person among everybody else, and you did everything right, and you fill in all the check boxes, but why you? Do something different, and I can't tell you what that is because, well, that would defeat the purpose. And you have to figure out what can you do that makes you different and makes you stand out from the other people. You have to be noticed. You can be great and not be noticed. You can be the best one out there, but nobody finds you, and you're the most highly skilled unemployed person in the world. In the end, you have to be visible.
With that, let's take our last question.
Sure.
This question is for the panel. Are there any recommendations on where to find job opportunities in the quant space? So if you were an audience member, what would be your recommendations for us to identify opportunities where we could apply to?
I can start from the buy side. It's actually a little bit more obtuse than people think. People ask me all the time, how do you get a job in a hedge fund? How do you do this? And I really think there's a couple things you have to focus on. Number one, you need to have a very good visible profile organized of what you can do so that you can be found. Because remember, we're in the world of digital data and information, so you need to have a good visible profile of who you are. You need to have, as I said again, ambassadors and people that know you. You need to always answer the phone when a recruiter calls you. You need to always reply to them. You need to always talk to them. Someone told me, this is an advice I got, because they said, and this is particularly, they said, one mistake that a lot of women make in our industry is if they don't want a job, they don't talk to the recruiter. And that includes men too. And so I said to myself, I'm never ever gonna be that person. So every recruiter that calls me, I talk to, because sometimes something else comes later, or they change firms, and a really interesting thing will come up, and they'll remember you. So always working on that network, always trying to also proactively reach out, because one of the issues is smaller firms like Buy-Side, we're really small. We don't, oftentimes these firms don't have a lot of resources for HR like banks. So we don't look for people for internships and things like that easily. We have very simple mechanisms. So try sometimes, proactively reach out. Almost all the internships I got was someone called me on the phone back in the day, and I said, who's this person? They said, hey, do you want to work at this hedge fund? I was like, who? I didn't even know who they were. So the point is, they will find you if you're more visible. Second of all, be a little more proactive. If you want to work for X, Y, Z as a fund, do a little bit of research. Figure out who you need to know to talk to that person. Send your resume, or try and figure out who collects resumes for this particular asset manager. So it's a little bit more of you got to work a little bit harder in an industry that's not a big firm industry to make sure that you have the right accessibility to get the luck to have the right person run into you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The recruiter route is very important. I also take all the calls that I can with recruiters, even though I'm not looking for any change. But also just to get the insights of the industry. They're the ones that know who are looking and who are building out new teams and so on. And of course that's important for us because we can then figure out who we should sell our data to, right? So that's really why I take those calls. But they're really the ones that know who are having efforts in the various banks and asset managers and so on.
I would, maybe that works very different on this side of the Atlantic. I've actually never met a recruiter who was worth the time to spend on the phone with. Recruiters are, at least in Europe, maybe it's very different over here, becoming more and more, LinkedIn spammers. The industry is decreasing, and professionals looking for good people to hire tend to look at what's around and existing contact grids and bypassing recruiters, and that's what I see in my part of Europe anyway, that I wouldn't ask a recruiter to go find somebody for me because he's just going to go send 10,000 messages on LinkedIn and hope that somebody answers. Maybe I'm, again, being a little bit cynical, but I would rather say try to build the connections directly with who matters in the firm. And sometimes it could seem intimidating, but you can more often than not get somebody on the other side that you could meet for a cup of coffee and have a chat with. And even if you're not trying to get a job at the moment, you're at least getting to know somebody who is on the inside. So to get to know the real people, I would say bypass the recruiters, in my experience, but maybe that's not the case in New York.
Definitely get involved with like your local quant community. There are meetup groups on data science, on quant finance, on a combination of the two, on any possible combination of technical topics in most major cities in the U.S. And going to those meetups is a great way to meet people in the industry. It's a great way to learn some of the language, maybe get some speaking opportunities yourself where you can talk about something cool that you've done. Put yourself out there a little bit. Get some of that visibility there. That's I think a pretty compelling new way to go about doing this in like this new age of information where everyone's trying to find their own little niche groups.
Okay, so I would like to first of all thank you guys for asking way more questions than I thought we would squeeze out of you. So thank you so much for participating, and thank you so much to our panel for sharing your insights. And now it's lunchtime.